Hello, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson, broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Okay. And there might be an issue with the stream. Okay, there we go. And people should trickle in now. Apologies, guys, with the stream. I was trying out a new type of software, and I couldn't get the software running in time. I gave myself just about 10 minutes to play around with XSplit, and I had a trouble with the key. Anyway, I hope everybody can hear me. Hope everybody can see me. And thank you all for waiting. I have family currently over, and so I had entertained them for today, but I did want to do an AMA when I got back to Colorado. So thank you for waiting. All right, let's take a look here. I hope you all have saved up some questions, comments, concerns, other such things. And let's see. First question. Okay, so while we wait for the questions to come trickling in, and those who are on the live stream, please do make sure to go ahead and submit the live stream link to the Telegram channels and elsewhere so we can get as many people as possible into the live chat, make it more of a dynamic, nice AMA. Things are going pretty good. We're in the nuts and bolts and weeds of getting Cardano in the final mile. The Shelley work is coming along. We have a huge amount of work on the specifications, a huge amount of work on the Haskell side, a huge amount of work we're doing on the Rust side of things. We are now in a weekly update cycle for the wallet backend. Matthias Bencourt is doing very good work there. Marcus has done some great work getting the Rust node running on a RockPi device. I share whenever he sends me cool videos of various devices working. I share that on Twitter. Basically, you have these small devices. They're about this big. They cost about $70, and you can connect all kinds of things to them, like external storage and a backup battery. We've even experimented with getting it to work with solar. So when you go to the IOHK Summit, you'll learn how to do this yourself. But basically, our hope is that these little RockPi boards can end up becoming kind of the de facto reference, open source, open hardware stake pool for people. They run on less than 10 watts of power. They're pretty easy to configure and set up. They're very reliable. So IOHK does have some ADA. So when we set up our stake pools, we'll probably use for our company's stake pools these little devices as reference boards. So look for that. We're pretty excited about it. Testnet, we're working super duper hard. We really wanted to get it out today. But we're still doing some last minute configurations. But the Shelley testnet should come out fairly soon, not like 6 months from now, but like more in the week to several week time horizon. And basically, that will be a great opportunity for us to roll over all the people we've accumulated in the Stake Pool Task Force channel into the Shelley testnet and begin hard stress testing and hopefully be able to get people running stake pools as quickly as possible. We hope on open hardware, but basically you can run them in any configuration, whether it be pushing something to an Amazon server or running it on your own computer at home. We're going to see how easy this setup happens to be. So good progress there. That last mile in software is always so difficult because a lot of things are always coming together. And there's tons of little things that people never thought about that they always become last minute issues. That punching software through that last 5% is always a challenge, but we're almost there. We ran into the same issue with Ledger. We had most of it done in February, and there were these tiny little things here and there that came up, and we just kept pushing and pushing and pushing to get it through. But we now have Ledger support, thousands and thousands of happy people. We got a lot of great messages. Most people can use them. Of course, with software, there's always some configuration somewhere that for some damn reason we can't get it through. This web USB standard or whatever it is, some people can't use it. We don't know why. But for 99.9% of people, most people can use their ledgers. They're having a good time with it. So we're pretty happy with that. Anyway, overall, things are looking great on the software side. Progress is pretty rapid. And as we approach the summit, I'm pretty proud of how hard the team has worked. And I'm glad that we're within a good range for how we ship things. And we're getting kind of weekly feedback and weekly releases for the wallet backend, for the Rust client, and soon to be the Haskell software as well. So we're all moving in the right direction. Okay, let's go ahead and answer your questions. Let's see what you guys have. All right. Will ADA support cold staking? The answer is yes. We've talked to Vacuum Labs about cold staking support for the Ledger devices. We're also in discussions with the Vacuum Labs guys and our own engineers about making sure that we have multi-sig support. So not only can you cold stake, and so what that basically means is that you create a key that you then import. So that's a staking key into Daedalus or Yoroi, and then you can use that key to stake with that or delegate with that. But then the spending keys remain on the cold wallet device, so you never lose control over the spending of the key. But you've now made a hotkey specifically for staking rights. So that capability will exist, and we're in discussions about how to add that support to Ledger. It probably will come out not soon, but in the Ledger Nano X timeframe. So that's in the late May, June timeframe, just because there's a lot to do there. But multi-sig is also part of that conversation as well. So the next major update will be saying, how do we get a good multi-sig cold wallet experience? So basically, you have kind of like a copay like multi-sig experience where you can build and kind of construct that transaction like a copay pub subsystem, where someone initiates a transaction amongst an M of N keychain, but instead of having the actual signature take place on the cell phone device, the signature will take place on a Ledger device, and then the signature will be transmitted to the cell phone and then sent to a pub sub server, which will then relay it to the other people in the keychain. So we'd like to figure that out, and we have some ideas of how we want to construct that quickly. A lot of the infrastructure we need for that is already built. It's just a matter of putting it together. And then kind of the next step is saying, let's also make sure we can do this with delegation as well. It's very important for us. It's important for Emergo. It's important for the CF. And it's important for you guys, the community. Okay. Can't talk about Coinbase listing. That's something that's off limits. Crazy hair on the side of your face. Yes, I am getting older and I need a haircut. I just got back from a 23-day world trip. And boy, it was fun. Hi, Charles. What's the status of partnership with Zencash/Horizon? P.S. They really shouldn't have changed their name. Actually, I liked Zencash a lot, but Horizon, okay. But everybody's always going to misspell it. I was not involved in the name change. I'm just there to answer questions. We do consulting work, and we're right now negotiating the next phase of consulting. I've always liked Rob and the rest of the team, and I think that they're good actors. Small cryptocurrency, but they're damn good actors. If I have a Raspberry Pi node, my internet fails, will my stake be slashed? This is an example of where people take concepts from other proof of stakes and they import them automatically into our proof of stake. There is no, in the incentives design that we have for Ouroboros at the moment, concept of slashing, where we destroy your stake. You do not have to bond ADA for our protocol to work. This is, in our view, an advantage of our protocol over last generation protocols. Bonding was kind of a clever mechanism to introduce some sort of cost to lying. But if you use the Epic design, then you don't actually need to do this because you're delaying payment to some sort of closure several days later. So anyway, there isn't the concept that somehow if you don't perform optimally, your money gets destroyed or you lose a bond or something like that. Now, your payments will go down, and if you don't do your job well at all, you get no payment. So obviously people won't want to stake to you, but we don't have the concept of slashing in our system. Okay. And by the way, we have answered a very big collection of questions from the Stake Pool Task Force, and we're now in the process of taking that collection of answers and putting them into a more accessible public format. So I just talked to Jer Maroney today. He's IOHK's Director of Operations, and Jer is right now exploring with a few different people in our marketing department about the best way of taking that question answer list and converting that question answer list into basically accessible content about how delegation and staking and incentives and rewards, what all these things are going to look like. So look for that. We have the answers. It's just getting them into a website. The IOHK Summit has really sucked a lot of the air out of our marketing capacity, where most of our people are focused on that and getting through the summit. So that's almost done, but it's slowed down some of our ability to release other marketing assets, for example, the Stake Pool Task Force website. Let's see what else we got here. Well, we have a DApp platform by the end of 2019. I don't see any major delays that would prevent us from having smart contract support by the end of 2019, and certainly before the end of 2019. Goguen is a parallel project to Shelley. So they have separate teams, and they've been working now for about 2.5 years on designing the languages, Plutus and Marlowe, and basically building up infrastructure for them. Now, there are lots of things we can do to improve Plutus. We've already learned a lot of useful usability lessons for the Plutus Playground and for Meadow that were a direct consequence of the course we taught in Ethiopia, because the girls spent the last month basically being Plutus developers. So we'll keep doing that, and we've already incorporated some of those improvements for the hackathon we're going to do in April for the IOHK Summit. So that'll come. Now, there is a broader discussion of, well, what is an app platform, and what does an app platform mean for a cryptocurrency? Now, my goal, and this has been something that I've been wanting to do since 2014, is this concept of a dApp browser. So basically the idea is that you have something that's kind of like the Chrome Web Store or the Google Play Store, where you can search for an experience, and that can be a game, that can be a gambling application, that can be a wallet. Comes up, there's ratings, there's an author, there's metadata, and there's a button to install. You click it, something happens, you install it, then it goes into your app catalog, and basically that state can be updated by the author of the system. Now, the hope is that the backend for that is that some of the logic will be running in decentralized infrastructure, and then also that decentralized infrastructure will handle tasks like author management, registration, reputation management, and triggers for and foundational technology like GraphQL. And for about roughly a year, our companies explored this with Darko Mashik as the product manager. And there's Ries and a few other people. And we'll probably do some sort of workshop at the summit explaining what we've learned and what we're considering. Some people are moving away from Electron. For example, you may have read recently that the MIST project has been retired, and that was built on top of Electron. That I believe the Brave browser was in some way built on top of Electron, and now they've moved to a pure Chromium fork. And then there is a lot of discussion about potentially using WASM plus WASI as an alternative. We also explored Docker, and we've explored some other containerization technology. The problem with containerization is it's simply too heavy for a lot of these types of experiences. So we're still studying that, but I think that's the consumer moment, getting to that easy search, easy curation, easy installation, which seamlessly blends the client, the server, and the blockchain infrastructure together, and has a good author management, a good distribution story, and in some way does not require central curation. That's what we call the dApp browser. And no one in the industry has really figured out an optimal way to do that. But there are a lot of foundational technology that potentially can let us get in that direction. There are some challenges, like, for example, cross-application communication. So ideally, you'd like a situation where every piece of cryptocurrency infrastructure or blockchain infrastructure lives within this sandbox. So you would no longer have a separate wallet, and then that somehow communicates with this dApp browser. You'd like them to be one and the same. So you download in some part in the future, basically an empty socket, an empty framework, and then you search and you decide what types of apps you want. So you'd enter something like Cardano Wallet or Bitcoin Wallet, and there would be vendors who've deployed there with various trusts. And then you click on it and say, yes, I want the Txo Cardano Wallet. You download that, and then once you have it, you can store ADA. And then you'd have other apps with dependencies. So, for example, you download the Charles Hoskinson's Wild Poker app or something like that. Well, that needs a permission to access the Cardano wallet. So when you make ADA bets, you can drag money out and put it into whatever escrow mechanism that particular software happens to have. Well, the minute that you introduce two applications that live in the same system where the apps can communicate with each other through some sort of bridge, and there's permissioning, i.e. an app can take money from one or do something with the other, then you have a whole litany of attacks, escalation of privileges, and other things that can occur. And so we, from an information theoretic standpoint, an info security standpoint, have been thinking about, well, can we build some sort of permissioning system that makes sense and it's fairly tunable, and also it's not gameable, so that users don't accidentally hand away the keys to the kingdom. And this is the intrinsic challenge behind these types of systems. So the problem is that the more you do to enhance the consumer experience, meaning the more seamless you make things, the less menus people have, the less configuration people have, the less prompting you'd give the user, the more likely it will be that people will basically inadvertently say yes to something that could steal their money, or download an untrusted application that can cause quite some problems. And so this is an open usability issue that everybody has to contend with. To give you an idea of how bad these problems can be, just in our own ecosystem, when Ledger support was announced, there were people who were shipping fake software to Ledgers to actually steal people's keys. And every time we do an update for Cardano, hackers wait for the announcement. And as soon as they do, they ship fake binaries for Daedalus that, again, will steal people's money. So there sure as hell a lot of great hackers out there who are terrible human beings, but they invest enormous amounts of money into trying to scam innocent people into stealing their money. So when you create an app platform, the smart contract side of it can be trustless and with the best of intentions. But then when you put all these things together and you have the ability for cross-application communication, you could emergently create security issues for people that are, in some cases, difficult to detect. And no amount of formal methods or computer science magic will kind of protect you, because at the end of the day, you may be, as the user, authorizing the system to do something against your best interest. It's a great conversation to have. You build things in layers. Decentralization, smart contracts are kind of the foundational layers of the system. And then getting good developer experience is the next. And then having a good platform to deploy these things on is the next after that. And we have kind of a collection of teams that work on all these different things. And we're trying to work as much as we can in parallel. And we do have some good ideas about what an app platform would look like. And currently, our best guess is to do this with Electron. All right, let's see what else we got. Can we expect Ledger with Daedalus integration? The answer is yes. We are planning on doing that. It was less of a priority because at the end of the day, regardless if you access your Ledger device with a cell phone application, a Chrome application, or a heavy desktop application, basically the key management is always done on the Ledger device itself. So at the end of the day, that's just a pretty front end. It's a window into your device and a command center that allows you to work with your device, but it does not control the keys themselves. So there really isn't a security difference accessing your Ledger from Daedalus than there is accessing your Ledger from Yoroi. Because of the way Yoroi was constructed, and it was on a much better code base due to being inherited from Icarus on the Rust code base, it was considerably simpler for Vacuum Labs and Emergo to build that support into Yoroi. We're in the process of completely changing all the code behind Daedalus, and that's almost done. There are two teams working, a Rust team and a Haskell team, and we're just paying that price of rewriting. Once that's done, it'll be very straightforward for us to add things like Ledger support and multi-sig. It just simply makes no sense to build that support on top of the old code base. As frustrating as it can be, the point of deploying Icarus and Yoroi was to basically give people a thread that we can add features rapidly to, so you could get Ledger and multi-sig and these types of things, and it didn't slow us down while we're in the process of rewriting everything for Shelley and for Goguen. So once that rewrite's done, Ledger support will happen, and actually other initiatives will happen as well. For example, we're going to start implementing the proof-of-stake sidechains work and move Daedalus into a light client by default. And it'll upgrade into a full node in the background. So basically, what will happen is we have basically a cryptographic structure which will ship with the wallet, which basically means that when you boot up the wallet for the first time, the only thing it's going to do to start is grab the existing UTXO. We'll put something in the protocol to easily ship this to the client. It'll be able to check that very rapidly and then use that cryptographic structure to validate that You Txo is correct. At that point, you'll be able to very easily and straightforward use your wallet, spend money from it, restore a wallet into it with no problem, and then it'll gradually download the blocks before. So you won't have to have this waiting for the entire blockchain to sync or other things like that. So that's a big priority of mine from a usability viewpoint. I would like for Daedalus to be significantly lighter. There's also some discussions about how can we make Electron lighter for the user, because it's a very heavy framework, and for some people it just seemed to be a bit much. We've made huge wins in 2018. For example, we went from memory utilization of about 2 gigabytes to about 500 megabytes. And then also we considerably reduced the amount of storage requirements for downloading the Cardano blockchain by a factor of about 5 or 6. But we can do better, and improvements to the wallet backend, improvements to the core code, improvements to the database technology that we use, and also just improvements to Electron itself can probably push us in the right direction. And then having a light client mode by default, I think, will dramatically help usability for the core nodes of the system. Can you speed up research with more recruit people in this project, Charles? You know, this is a question that comes often, like, why can't you go faster? Can you hire more people? There's a misconception of software engineering and research that somehow you get linear scaling. So, you know, if you have 10 engineers and you go to 20 engineers, you're twice as fast. The reality is that software kind of has a critical mass for any one part you're working on in the architecture, the code base you have, and the collection of things that you want to do. That if you go beyond that critical mass of engineers for the methodology you're following and for the code base you're working in the project, you actually have people tripping up on each other. IBM was one of the first companies to notice this, and I think they wrote a paper about it in the 1970s or 80s, and I forget the term of it. So we're at maximum capacity for engineers at Cardano. We have a lot of great people. They're working very hard. And right now, the only efficiency gains we can get are gains of when we actually have proper things like better processes. So Bruno Paleo is our director of engineering, and he wakes up every day and he's trying to systematically install better processes throughout our organization. That was one area we were weak in 2017 and throughout 2018. We just simply had the wrong philosophy for how to build software. It was in a too much of a waterfall-esque way for my comfort. So the good news is that we've already transformed several teams. The Rust team and the Haskell Wallet backend team are both operating, I'd say, at near peak efficiency or as close to as good as we can get. I like the models that they're using. And we're seeing week by week a transformation of the legacy Haskell groups where they're starting to gain better acceleration and they're starting to work pretty well. The formal methods team also needs a little bit of acceleration due to the nature of the work that they're doing. It's a little difficult to accelerate things. And also on the research side, researchers are researchers. This is why you start foundational research as far back as you can. And it's important to remember that we've been doing research since 2015. So on all the core technologies that we intend on shipping in 2019, the research has either concluded or it's reaching the refinement and proof cleaning stage, meaning that the core protocols have not changed. So those have been available for a while. People can play with them. Looking on to the roadmap to the future, we have a little bit more to do on the single-threaded Ouroboros side. So there's an upcoming paper called Ouroboros Chronos, and that paper solves some issues with the clock, and it'll be a major advancement of proof of stake. It's currently under submission, I think, to crypto. And look for that paper soon. And then the very next paper will be something involving spikes of dishonest majority. At that point, outside of quantum resistance checkpointing, quantum computer checkpointing, there's really not much more to do that will add substantial value to the Ouroboros research stream. And we'll be in a position where, we could basically say, this is it, it's complete. And would be 30 to 40 times faster than Bitcoin and in terms of throughput, and then order of magnitude better in terms of latency, if not, and we probably could improve that more. And would be 100 times more decentralized. So that's a pretty good win. But we did want to do sharding, and we have ideas on how to do that. And that's really taking the parallel chains research stream and taking the side chains research stream and combining them with what we've done with Ouroboros. And those three things together become Ouroboros Hydra. So once we finish off with Chronos and we finish off with all the refreshes of the Ouroboros paper family that we have, we've made considerable improvements to the proofs. We've simplified some of them, extended other ones, resolved some theoretical issues here and there that came up during the peer review process or from our own analysis. Things are just more readable, and there's a lot more clarity that we have. Then the research team will immediately begin working on the final steps of the sharding part. But then there's a lot of open questions about things like the incentive side of the protocol, the delegation side of the protocol, the stake pool design of the protocol. And there are a lot of interesting research questions that we can pursue there and will pursue there. We're pretty happy with what we've done out of Oxford, and we're pretty happy with what we've done with the specifications on how delegation incentives work. But there's always room for improvement. So there's going to be some scientists who play in that area and work in that particular area. But, all things considered, we've gone from aspirational, from scalability and interoperability, sustainability as the three pillars of things that we'd like to play with, to a massive tsunami wave of papers and designs. And the end result, the output of these processes, are basically us converging to a really good concept of what a permanent system needs to look like, that will leave great stubs for future researchers and future engineers to improve it. All things considered, with the resources we had, the engineering time and the science time we put in, we're pretty happy with the outcome of that. Adding more researchers and scientists would be, frankly, counterproductive, with a few exceptions. We probably could use some more people on the PL side just to build up the ecosystem around it. For example, we are scaling the team that's working on compiling Haskell to JavaScript and compiling Haskell to WebAssembly. And that team will be finished in terms of its scale by end of April, mid-May. We're just onboarding people right now, and they'll reach peak capacity in terms of their output sometime during the summer. And so then this will make it considerably easier to deploy Plutus contracts in a node setting or in the browser or these types of things. So, there's some stuff to do there. There's also some stuff to do on libraries and SDKs and, things like that. But those things come organically as a back and forth between developers and the maintainers of the system. But core people, we certainly have enough, and we've certainly learned a lot. Let's see what we got here. Why is your live cam quality so poor? It looks like you're being filmed underwater. I'm on a 4G connection. I live in a town. This is the great tantalizing irony of my life. I think it's a great analogy for it. I live in Longmont, Colorado, just outside of Boulder, and Longmont actually has a municipal ISP that has 1 gigabit up and down fiber optic internet connectivity for $60 a month. I live just a few miles outside of the fiber zone, and not only do they not service my area, Comcast and CenturyLink do not for high-speed internet. So my only option is to go with satellite or a 4G connection. Both are about the same speed, about 30 to 40 Mbps, down rate with about 10 up, and one is an order of magnitude higher latency than the other. So I'm on a 4G connection. And my co-founder, Jeremy Wood, he lives just in town, and he's on a 1 gigabit per second connection. And so he often reminds me how wonderful his 4K webcam and his video conferencing happens to be. And I have to make do with my connection. So I hope when 5G rolls out, I get better options. But at the moment, this is as good as it gets for where I'm at. But I have a much better view. Can you elaborate on the work that Cardano is doing in Ethiopia? So Ethiopia is basically one of our flagship and beautiful places that we work in. It has 106 million people. 70% are under the age or at the age of 30. And it's a country that's going through enormous economic growth. And at the same time, it really does need to change the way it's doing things. 85% of the country is agricultural. Most of the food is grown or some way connected to about 15 million smallholder farmers. They have a big problem with diaspora on the perimeters of the country. They're landlocked, and they consistently have border issues with some of their neighbors. The country's had historical issues with establishing free and fair markets. There are a lot of monopolies who have to be deconsolidated, broken up. And there's a lot of people that do like taking advantage of some of the poorest people in the world, and they need to go away or be disintermediated. So the prime minister and ministries there are quite forward-thinking, and there are some that are better than others. In particular, we really like the Ministry of Innovation and Technology. We work very closely with them. We also like the Agricultural Transformation Agency led by Mr. Khalid Bamba, who used to work for Bill Gates. It's actually one of the first ministries I think of that is funded by private interests, but yet it's still a government ministry. And they've done some great work taking about 3.2 million of the 15 million smallholder farmers and putting them into collective bargaining units called ACCs, agricultural commercialization clusters. So basically they can unify the farmers on standards, from what fertilizers they use to what types of commodities they grow. There's about 10 commodity areas that the ACC focuses on. Then they can use these standards and they can use these better practices and better data collection to increase output, get better prices for the food, and ensure that farmers, by collectively bargaining, they have a bit more economic voice and power than a normal smallholder farmer would. Because when you're only on an acre of land and you don't have a lot of output, you kind of just have to be at the mercy of whatever the market happens to give you. So talking to the ATA, they have basic problems they'd love to solve. For example, they say, hey, we got our fertilizer in Djibouti, and they come in as 50-pound bags. And by the time they get to Addis Ababa, they're a little lighter. They're like 45 pounds or 44 pounds. So, somewhere along the way, some fertilizer is being taken, or they come back to the same weight, but when you open it up, it's adulterated. So maybe it's 35 pounds of fertilizer and it's 15 pounds of dirt or sand or something like that. Somebody basically swapped it. Or the bags just magically grow legs and they kind of walk away. So when you have situations like that, the conversations usually stem around, can we build a blockchain solution for that supply chain? So when the bags get checked in Djibouti and they work their way to Addis or wherever they end up being shipped to, all along the way, you can kind of discover who's touched it, who's done things with it, what warehouses are storing it, and basically where it's getting adulterated or stolen, or slippage is occurring. So projects like that, and we're working real hard to try to create pilots along those lines, because those pilots not only deploy blockchain solutions on an enterprise side to the country of Ethiopia, but they also work at creating digital identities for people, digital wallets for people. And this is fundamentally going to be compatible with Cardano. So once you have these digital identities and you have, really cheap cards that have trusted hardware modules in them, like a Tangem style card, you can then start talking around that infrastructure and saying, well, we also can now go ahead and give people loans. And by the way, the ACC has extensive records that are cross-referenced with different data sets on those 3.2 million farmers. And at some point, they can consolidate them and use it as an identity kernel that's quite reliable. And in the existence of things like the ACC allow you to do voucher programs and lending programs. In fact, they did an experiment in 2014 with a voucher program where they gave out loans as vouchers, and they had a 100% repayment rate for the 35,000 farmers that they gave vouchers to. 100%, every single farmer repaid at the end of the day because of the way they structured things. So there's really a tremendous amount of innovation there. And if you get in early, you can get blockchain solutions to solve very simple, easy to understand problems that do require a lot of social dynamics to get solved. And in the process, you've now created a huge space of reliable people for lending, insurance, stablecoin proliferation, and so forth. So throughout all of Africa, we are exploring stable coins. We are exploring alternative marketplaces for security tokens. We are exploring kind of out-of-the-box ways to market and explain cryptocurrencies to the masses, including potentially tokenizing sports teams. We'll make some sort of announcement about that in Jinja. It's in Uganda. And we are exploring things like supply chains and property and business registration. Now, we always view enterprise blockchain as the gateway drug to get people into the decentralized world. And of course, our preference will be to connect people to Cardano. We will not actively build bridges to other systems because Cardano is awesome. And who knows about other systems? Okay. Will 5G cause mass depopulation via DNA corruption? Yeah, it's way outside of my ballpark. I've seen the videos. You've probably seen Super Smart on YouTube, that some people do have concerns about 5G and if it has health consequences. Some have actually come from credible universities and researchers. And it is an interesting question. Does the existence of this technology, given the shortwave and high energy, cause some sort of health consequence? And the answer is, I don't know. It's not my domain of expertise, but it does give me a little bit of concern. I noticed my brother, who's a doctor, tends to use a Bluetooth headset and doesn't like talking on the phone straight to his head. He's convinced that cell phones may not be the best thing in the world for health. But the proof is kind of in the pudding there, where if we see a huge uptick in brain cancer or skin cancers or things like that, then I guess 5G is probably somewhere to blame. All right. Dante says, Charles Matias said something about fee paid from recipient. Any update about that? This concept of contingent settlement. And we are exploring contingent settlement. So basically the idea is that you have Alice and Bob. And under a push transaction system, Bob pushes a transaction to a known address of Alice. Now, Alice can be a pseudonym or anonymous. It can just be numbers, but it's some sort of payment address. So Bob just pushes it in. Now, here's the thing. Alice did not consent to that. Alice just received the payment. Furthermore, Bob had to pay the transaction fee to push the value to Alice. So when you take a step back and you deconstruct this, you'd really rather have the ability to do transactions where you have some sort of interaction between Alice and Bob in that process. So, for example, at the base level, you'd like perhaps to capture the commercial intent between Alice and Bob. So Bob isn't just pushing money to Alice for just the sake of sending money. Some people do that. We see that with dust transactions with Bitcoin, for example. But for the most part, Bob is buying something, or Bob has some commercial expectation, or Bob is making a donation. But in all these cases, there is an understanding between Bob and Alice that relates to the transaction. At the moment, that's meta, that's abstracted from the system. So the base layer doesn't record that. So while the layer is saying an event happened, here's the nature of the event in terms of the amount of value and the actors involved, and it's going to timestamp it, and that record's immutable, the contract, the social dynamics of that event are not captured in the system, which means they're subject to debate. So giving an example of this, let's say that Bob goes to an ATM and withdraws $300 of value out of an ATM. Now, that's a transaction. Now, let's say Bob did that next to an Italian restaurant on his birthday, and all of his friends happened to be there. You would say, "Oh, it looks like Bob's pulling money out to pay the check, or in some way is connected to this event. It's a celebration. There's people there. It's expensive." And let's say it's at 12 o'clock. It's lunchtime. Now, Bob can then go move $300 from an ATM, so the same type of transaction, but now we've changed the metadata. Let's say it's at 2 a.m. right next to a known brothel. So basically the exact same type of transaction, the same type of value, the same actor involved is an account and the money, but because you've changed the metadata, it has vastly different implications. So what if you could swap these metadata, and then suddenly you can now make the Italian restaurant look like the brothel? Whoever controls that story has a lot of power. So contingent settlement can basically be about saying something as simple as we embed within the transaction some of the representation of the story of the transaction, and potentially do contingent settlement where we have consent from both parties involved. Okay, so that doesn't have to be public. that can be private. It can be as simple as taking the contract of the transaction, hashing that, signing it, and then requiring the other party to sign that hash as well before that settles. So imagine the case of a donation deed. So I'm going to give $10,000 to Bob's foundation, and I expect Bob to do X, Y, and Z with the money. Maybe it's a church raising money, and they say, we will only spend this money on hurricane relief for refugees in Haiti. So they sign that, I sign that. There's now a legal record. It's timestamped, it's immutable, it's auditable, but it's private because the only two parties that actually know what that transaction was about are the people who have the pre-image of the hash, the underlying contract. But there's cryptographic, non-reputable evidence on both sides that Alice and Bob agreed to that particular type of transaction and that story behind that transaction. Now, taking it up a notch, when you have smart contract capabilities, you can go beyond just embedding a hash and having this transaction only settle when Alice and Bob agree, to also saying that Alice will agree to pay the transaction fee for Bob. So basically, Alice will issue a transaction to feed into the transaction Bob is going to initiate to basically pay that fee. So you can then replicate the credit card style process where the merchant pays the processing fee instead of the consumer. This is captured in a contingent settlement system, assuming you have interactivity between these two actors. And stateful, eventful contracts, smart contracts actually allow you to do this. We can capture that behavior. You also can think about things like delayed settlement, where basically you can have an escrow party that can intervene for some period of time. You get a charge, your money goes to a contract, but it doesn't clear for some period of time, let's say a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So you have a little bit of time to put up a flag and say, I've been defrauded. Or I don't actually want to do this anymore. I want a refund or something like that. And the third party can step in and reverse the transaction. All of these types of things can be embedded and basically connected into the transaction structure. And Plutus will enable you to do this. This is one of the reasons we designed Plutus the way that we designed it. So I think it's very important to talk about embedding metadata. It's very important to talk about contingent settlement. And it's important to kind of just talk around the parties who are getting into a financial transaction with each other. And then, it's later versions of Daedalus, the Cardano wallet system. We're going to build in the capabilities of doing these types of transactions. So basically, at some point, we'll have a friend system where Alice and Bob have pub sub. They can get to know each other and create an out-of-band way to transmit data to each other and create basically a web of trust. So Alice, once you've accepted who she is and she's accepted who you are, so you've decided to do that out of band, then you can say, okay, I'm going to send her a copy of the contract, and she's going to send me a copy of the contract. And now we have a script that runs where the money only gets transferred if both parties consent, and then boom, it moves. And then you have legal record that you can then take that's admissible, that you can use in a lawsuit or some external system to get recourse, and that exists. So we'll build these types of capabilities in at some point. They're not super hard to build, especially after you have the right foundation. The Cardano Rust client will eventually grow in this direction with the scriptlet design that we have. Plutus was built for these types of things, and Daedalus as infrastructure. The Electron infrastructure is very malleable, so it's easy for us to move in this direction. It's just we have to rewrite the entire core of the system to build on top of it, and then once it's rewritten, we can rapidly build on top of it, and we can get these really nice to have features like PubSub and CSV export, and having a wallet export format, and things like that, and then have a really nice, cool discussion about embeddable metadata into transactions. Okay. How do you like your steak cooked? Medium to medium rare. You never really can go wrong with medium, because if they overcook it, you get it medium well, and it's still pretty good. They undercook it, you get it medium rare, and that's not too bad. And I love having salt on it. Good steakhouse is always going to give you salt with the steak. Do you see yourself working on Cardano for the rest of your life, Charles, or do you want to move to other things one day? Yeah, that's a good question. The world is too interesting and complicated just to do one thing. Even Bill Gates left and he went to other things. I'd like to believe Steve Jobs would one day retired from Apple and probably made like flutes or something, and hand carved wood. One of my biggest regrets in my academic career was that I didn't invest more time into the arts. I spent a great deal of time in STEM. Initially, I wanted to be a doctor, so I did a lot of things in the biology side of the STEM world. But I didn't really focus too much on drawing and painting. And I collect art now, and I love music, and I love this area of the world. So I've always been a spectator, but never a participant, and that's a great shame. The late great Richard Feynman also later in life developed a profound appreciation for the arts, and he was known for entering into reciprocity agreements with various artists where he'd teach them something about physics and then they would teach him something about art. And so there was numerous people who taught him how to draw and taught him how to paint. And as he got older, he actually started doodling really beautiful drawings. And so I think it is important to do these things. And so later in life, I'd like to explore that. Rudy Rucker's certainly done it, and others have done it, and I think it's much to their benefit. And life is simply too short to just do one thing. The point of the work I do is to build systems and then give those systems to people. And once they understand how those systems work, they maintain, operate, and innovate those systems themselves. So if we get it right, I basically become obsolete. And better people come in who are much more competitive, much brighter, much more capable, and those people can take the system to the next level. And I'd like to believe that if we built IOHK correctly, at some point the company will become a DAO. It will not need a CEO. Cardano will not lead any notion of leadership. It'll be completely bottom up. And at that point, it would be counterproductive for me to be around. Now, I can still work on the product, but I'd just be one of many people working on it. And frankly, I'm getting old and fat. Hair is getting wily. So I think there's better things in life to do. And I can move more into the arts and enjoy that. And there are some things in the sciences I'd like to do. I'm a big fan of reverse mathematics. I'm a big fan of homotopy type theory. I'm a big fan of building open source computer algebra systems and talking about the formalization of mathematics using things like Lean and Agda and Coq. So I think there's an enormous amount of interesting things that can be done there. I'm also keen to find better ways to unify different fields of mathematics and translate concepts in one to another. Many of the great mathematicians of the 20th and 19th century focused on that, and whenever they made a connection point, like a tie with the index theorem or something, it was always something pretty special. So I think I have enough brain cells left that if I retire soon enough, I might actually be able to do something there. But unfortunately, mathematics is always a game for the young. And as you get older, you start realizing that you aren't quite in that category anymore. Why don't you go on the Joe Rogan show like Andreas Antonopoulos did? I would love to go on the Joe Rogan show, but for you guys, we need to get our biggest bang for the buck. So let's get Shelly out, let's get Gogan out, and I can go on and talk about how we're doing amazing things in Africa, and I can talk about all the things the platform can do. So instead of saying aspirational things that are coming soon, I can say it is shipped, it is there, and I can give them cool demos and show them cool things. We're almost at that critical mass, but he has a huge audience, and there's a bit of strategy there. And it took quite a bit of time to get Andreas onto Joe Rogan, years. We'll have that moment, and it's going to be a really good moment, really cool moment. Have you been bitten by a mosquito before? I grew up in Hawaii. Yes. been bitten by many mosquitoes. Many, many, many. Can you tell me more about how they are running a node on only 10 watts of power? So this is one of the stark contrasts between proof of work and proof of stake. So in the proof of work systems, you invest most of your effort into figuring out who's going to be in charge. So that's a contest. It's like everybody's using these devices to buy a certain amount of lottery tickets, your hash rate, or how many tickets you get. And eventually you hit one of those lucky tickets, you win, you say, I got a golden ticket, and it gives you the right to build the block. And then you go and build that block. And then almost immediately the contest starts on over again to go and find who has the next golden ticket. It's almost like Willy Wonka, right? Everybody's buying chocolate bars and they finally find the right chocolate bar, and then that's great. They found it. Let's go find the next chocolate bar with the golden ticket. What does that mean? Well, it means, number one, you're going to have consolidation towards whoever has access to the chocolate. In this case, the mining hardware and the subsidized power. So you tend towards centralization in that system, and that's exogenous control. I mean, it's outside of the system. In proof of stake, they say we're going to focus all of our effort on basically what the person does when they create the block. Because at the end of the day, selecting a winner, it's like it's an a priori thing. It's built within the system. It's endogenous control, and not a lot of energy or effort is expended on trying to decide that. You basically run some protocol, you elect a bunch of people, and you say, all right, this group of people, you're in charge, and then you're talking around how do we make what they construct as fast as possible, as efficient as possible, and also make it as useful as possible to the system. So you're just thinking about basically different things. Now you're achieving the same ends. You're finding people to advance the state of the system. So when you issue a transaction, it's almost like a finite state machine. You have basically a ledger that's in state alpha, and you have a bunch of transactions to go to state beta. So you're going from one state to the next state. So you're finding somebody to pull those changes together and execute those changes. But basically, proof of work really thinks a lot about how do we find that person and make that as difficult and expensive as a process as possible, and embed that search into the protocol itself to kind of give the protocol some weight and credibility. And proof of stake says we have some way of finding that person. And if you agree that that's a good idea, now let's just only talk about that state transition and how do we make that as good as possible. So the advantage of proof of stake then is that you really can put a lot of oomph into basically making that transition faster, making it better for the consumer, and do a lot of work yet. Basically having kind of a reputation of how well you did that. So there's going to be actors who kind of stick around in the proof of stake system in a very explicit way, which are only sticking around in a very implicit way in proof of work. So you have pools in both systems. In a proof of work system, you have a mining pool. Could be a private pool or a public pool, but whether they do a good job or not, whether they're including lots of transactions or not, you can't fire them usually, because they usually control the hash power themselves or do it via a consortium. So reputation is almost non-existent in modern mining dynamics. This was less true when we had GPUs and CPUs mining, and people would give their hash power to a pool. Then you had Slush competing against another mining pool, And we kind of had our favorites, and I had my favorite and everybody else had it. But now if they own the hardware, you just live by whatever tyranny they give you. The proof of stake system, it's all social dynamics. So we can start talking around basically what services is this pool providing? Are they doing a good job? Can they demonstrate that they've made all the blocks they were supposed to make? Are they also running full nodes and relaying data in the system? Are they providing value-added layer 2 solutions like Lightning channels or Oracle services? And are they getting increasingly more sophisticated hardware? Plus, they tend to stick around for a while, so you can start optimizing among that heterogeneity in the system. But you still get basically the same utility and arguably, depending upon the view you look at, great degree of decentralization in the system because you can always increase the amount of pools. And the way we design things, it's quite easy to do that. We just adjust 2 parameters in the incentives model of the system. So 10 watts of power is basically saying the software you need to run to advance the state of the system is basically light enough that it can work on low power open hardware that uses the same type of processor your cell phone happens to use. It uses an ARM processor, which has to consume very little amounts of power because you don't have a big battery in your cell phone. And if it consumed a lot of power, your cell phone will only last a little bit of time. So in many ways, the kinds of things to make your cell phone faster, more energy efficient, also can now make Cardano faster and more energy efficient. And ultimately means that we're getting to more and more performance and more efficiency as we go on. Whereas mining has the opposite dynamics. When you increase the value of the underlying asset, you increase the power consumption, and whatever hardware performance gains in terms of getting more hashes out of the same watt of power are basically factored in. You don't actually get a more efficient system, you just simply get more miners. So if I'm twice as power efficient, I'll just buy twice as many miners and I'll be competitive in that range. So you never actually save in electricity. There's always an incentive for more. Proof of work adherence consider that a feature of the system. Proof of stake proponents consider that to be a fatal bug of the system. Looks like you liked Justin in your last meet. Are there any plans to do a partnership with him? Justin's son is an interesting guy. He is, I think, a product of China's business environment. China has had this way of going about business where they take things that exist in the Western world, they copy them and market the hell out of them, whether they actually have a good simulacrum or not, a good product or not, a good clone or not. And they just pretend like they're the biggest guys in the world. They get a lot of users, they get a lot of hype, the money comes, and then when they have the money, they buy their way into legitimacy through strategic acquisitions. So, we want to build X, and X can be jet turbines, it can be batteries, it can be cars. And we're just going to say that we're doing that, and we're doing it better than everybody else. And oh, look, $1 billion showed up. And hey, well, since we have $1 billion, let's go buy, Rolls-Royce for $250 million, their jet engine plant or something, or let's go buy BitTorrent, or let's go buy this. And now we have engineers and real people, and look, those real people are doing real innovation. And you wake up, and if this process is successful, you basically ended up constructing the company that will inevitably actually build the product, which inevitably could be competitive. Justin did not invent that. This is something that everybody in China has done, from Huawei to Baidu, Alibaba, every company in that jurisdiction. They just took the Western model, they pretended like they in some way innovated it, and then they got enough momentum and money to actually get the people they needed to actually build the underlying infrastructure to a point where they one day could actually be competitive and potentially even innovate. So the game for him is to stay alive long enough and get enough engineers and enough scientists that they inevitably could deliver something to market, which could actually be real. And then they get to say, I told you so, haha, we knew it all along. It was part of the master plan. So Justin's job is to be the marketer in chief, go around the world and basically tell everybody how amazing Tron is and what Tron will do. And they just went ahead and forked Ethereum Java and put DPoS on top of it. And then they just made some strategic acquisitions here and there, and they're kind of stumbling their way into potentially an architecture that may be viable. You can either take that as, well, that's a little dishonest, or you can just accept that that's how China does business. And then you also can realize that within that structure, there is tremendous opportunity for partnership, a tremendous opportunity for joint ventures, and potentially mutually beneficial relationships that both parties could benefit from tremendously. But you also do have to understand that should the process fail, meaning they run out of money or support, you're basically talking about a hollow enterprise, and the entire structure can collapse down on itself. it's almost like building the skin of a building and hoping to God the building doesn't collapse while you build the substructure within. Sometimes that works and you get away with it. Nobody's the wiser, but sometimes the building collapses and kills all the workers inside. So that's my take on the whole thing. That said, Justin was very kind to me. He was a very nice guy, and I have no grievance or issues with him. And in person, I think he's a nice person. I can't comment on business ethics. I can't comment on how he's run Tron, or where the money for Tron came from, or how he set up that project. It's a black box to me, and it's something I couldn't care less about, to be honest with you. And I know a lot of people seem to care a lot about it. We never get press at CoinDesk, but CoinDesk writes articles about Tron's Tesla giveaways. So it just kind of shows you how these things work. That said, we just do fundamentally different things. I focused my life's work, and certainly my work at IOHK, on innovation. We're writing papers, we're writing code, we're building protocols. It's a slow, methodical, meticulous exercise that occasionally has great outputs like Icarus and Mantis and the wallet backend. And cumulatively over time, we build ourselves something quite special that's quite useful and beneficial for the entire ecosystem. I don't spend a lot of time figuring out how to market. I think that there are others who do that better than me. And frankly, this is not about marketing as a movement. This is ultimately about you. If we do this correctly, you guys are going to end up being the marketers that carry it to the world, because this is about your identity. This is about your reputation. This is about your money. This is about your property. This is about your right to vote. This is about your financial autonomy. I think it's much more meaningful, instead of talking about how much money people are going to make or how we're going to conquer the world or get mass adoption, to talk about the underlying philosophy and inspire people with the underlying philosophy. We did this in the Ron Paul movement. We started with 5,000 people when I joined, and when I left, we had 2 million people, all who cared about sound money and humble foreign policy and cared about following the Constitution. In a simple case, there are simple principles here. This is the concept of disintermediating the middlemen of necessity. This is a movement about personal control over your own money. And this is a movement about money wanting to be free, value wanting to be free, and you being in control of that. If we do this job correctly, then at the end of the day, we're going to end up having millions of people running around telling everybody, their parents, their friends, their neighbors, that this movement matters. So in many ways, I think that's the better way to market than to try to create some sort of central bureau that always is desperate for attention and hype. Because at the end of the day, you live and die by your ability to do that. If you're really good at it, you maybe make some progress, but the real competition has yet to come. There will be a day when there's a cryptocurrency wallet in Microsoft Windows. There will be a day when there's a cryptocurrency wallet built into Messenger. And within 3 to 5 years, every cell phone will have on and off ramps for cryptocurrencies. Now, I don't get to control what gets on those devices. Samsung, LG, Huawei, Apple, Microsoft, and Google get to control what's on those devices. And do you honestly believe for a moment, if they could profit from it, they would put my product in over something that they've built themselves, which they make far more money from, or perhaps is more regulatorily compliant? The only way we can overcome people that have already built the network effect of billions is not to be good at broadcasting giveaways and getting lots of users. The only way we can do that is understanding the underlying philosophy of the entire movement, and people being immunized against centralized solutions that are pretending to be. They're in decentralized clothing. We have to teach people how to spot wolves dressed as sheep, or else we've accomplished nothing. And that's my life's work. That's what we do. And if we don't accomplish that, then I honestly think within a few years, we'll just be consumed by the incumbents, because they already have the network advantage. They control billions of devices. They control what people see. And of course, the media will be on their side. Governments will be on their side. So they have an unfair advantage there. But you can disagree, of course. And if that's the case, there's plenty of options. There's over 3,000. They made a movie about you, Charles. Who do you want to play as you? Chris Pratt. They are writing 3 books about Ethereum. They're 3 separate authors. Laura Shin, Camille Rosso, I think, and then one other. And there are several chapters where I'm in those books. And if they sell well, they'll option a movie. So I might end up being played by somebody, depending upon the narrative. If I'm the villain or the hero or just a side character, will depend on the actor who plays me. Just as long as it's not Jack Black. Have you ever read Meditation by Marcus Aurelius? Yes. Stoicism for the win. I'm a bigger fan of Albert Camus. Tulsi Gabbard seems like she would be a good president. Hang loose. I love Hawaii, and she's one of our native Hawaiians. Of all the crazy Democrats running, she's the least offensive to me, and it's I think a great example of where that party is currently at, that she's not doing very well and being brutalized, despite the fact that she's the only one running who actually served in a war and dealt with the consequences of what politicians have done. They just don't seem to be very, very concerned with practical things. I did have a conversation with Laura Shin. Actually, when I was in New York, I had a 2.5-hour interview with her, and we'll probably have another interview. Mm-hmm. Please contact Ivan on Tech for interviews. He says you never reply, too busy. I will go on Ivan's show. I just haven't had the time. I was on a huge tour. Do you only own one shirt or 52 of the same shirt? That's for me to know. Remember, I'm a evil man, according to certain people on YouTube, who shall remain nameless. Are you a fan of the Roy wallet? Yes, huge fan. Excuse me. Hey, Charles, name your favorite rock band. That is Boston. I was brokenhearted that I couldn't get them to play at the summit. They were busy, so we got Steve Miller to play. I also really love Pink Floyd. We did talk to them. They were willing to come back together, but I wasn't willing to pay the price of having them come back together for a private event. But they are an interesting band. Steve Miller Band, CCR are also great. So you guys at the summit will have a lot of fun with that. Charles, how many push-ups can you do? More than you'd think, less than I used to be able to. Let's see here. What's your favorite TV show? And don't say Big Bang. God, I don't like the Big Bang Theory. It's pretty trite. No, I really prefer, on the animated side, Rick and Morty and BoJack Horseman are the 2 shows that I always follow. I used to watch Arthur, but it's kind of fallen out of favor with me. Then on the drama side, Westworld is a phenomenal show. Really, really enjoy it. Breaking Bad was also nice. Never got into Better Call Saul. You mentioned in the New York City meetup that IOHK was doing some research on proof of work. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Yes, we are. We actually have a whole team that's still thinking about proof of work, and we've done some interesting things. We have a consensus protocol we're working on, codenamed Minotaur. because no chains can bind it. And it's a major step forward with the proof of work world. And yes, I am ready for the final season of Game of Thrones. Season 7 was terrible. Season 6 was a masterpiece. I think they're rushing things a bit. And also George R.R. Martin really needs to publish his damn book so that they actually can go back on script. Is the concept of the meetups based on the movie Fight Club with Edward Norton and Brad Pitt? That's a thought. The first rule of Crypto Club. Don't talk about Crypto Club. Favorite sport? Chess. Well, that's always a question of to play or to watch. I think I'm going to get into soccer because I just bought a football team, a soccer team, and that's going to be interesting. I know very little about the sport, but actually I've become enamored with it, and so I figured learn by doing. And I had a little bit of spare money laying around, so I figured buy something. The team I bought are the Jinja Hippos, and we'll make some sort of announcement about that soon. UFC is also great. How many pins can you fit in your front pocket? 2. I always put 2. I currently have 3, but this one is a marker. Yeah, I always have 2 to write. And actually, one of the things I've been doing lately is putting a pen in my collar, especially when I don't have a front pen. And I really like it. I didn't expect the collar to be so awesome for holding pens, but it is. Do you bale your own hay for your horses? We're going to grow hay this season. In fact, we're talking with a neighbor right now about him sharing his field with our field and pooling it together and harvesting together and splitting the hay. But we're on 50 acres, so we do have some room for it. I'm also going to plant some sunflowers. Not going to run cattle on the ranch. We're going to probably run yaks and alpacas. The problem with me is I kind of fall in love with the animals, and if I had cows, I'd probably name them, and then it would be too hard to slaughter them. But if you get yaks and alpacas, you can shave them and make money off of the fur, so you never actually have to kill them. Yep, we do have chickens. Just got 14 of them. 2 died. Yeah, we're down to 12. You get little baby chicks, you always lose a few of them. But I think that we should be at about 10, maybe less, but 10 sounds good. Okay. Not only alpacas spit, they also run away. Llamas are a lot more stout, and they're kind of stronger. Also, you can put hats on llamas. It's a Jason Steele reference. I bought my leather jacket at Overland, and I've had it for years. And it's a dual zipper jacket, so the interior is usually what I zip up, and the exterior I zip up when it's very cold. And you'll see some pictures like when I was in the Arctic Circle where I had both of them zipped. Have you met Dan Larimer? I used to work with Dan Larimer many years ago. Not only have I met him, I've met his whole family. We do not get along. Were you ever good at arcade Donkey Kong? I played it, but it was a little bit before my time. I was really good at a game on Nintendo called Bubble Bobble. And I also played, what was it called? It came in a blue cartridge, and it was called Crystal Miner. I was really good at that game as well. Never won it, but I don't even know if you can win it. It's back in the days where you could just create games that didn't have endings and people didn't care. Crystal Miner. It wasn't Crystal Castles. You played a little robot and you drove around collecting diamonds, and then you try to avoid little things. Are there any known companies that show an interest building dApps on Cardano? Yes, many. And we'll get to that next time. Do you plan to come to Brazil anytime soon? You know, our director of engineering is Brazilian, Bruno Pelio, and he is going to Brazil after the IOHK Summit. We'll see if we can convince him to do a few Portuguese meetup groups. We also have several Brazilian cryptographers like Mario Laranjeira in our organization who have done some great work. So, obrigado, Brazil. And actually, it's not Ginger, it's Jinja. Jinja is a city in Uganda, and that's where the team is based. Yeah, we will have support for the Ledger Nano X. I've requested that. That's going to happen. I like the Ledger Nano X. It's pretty awesome. How many acres is the ranch? Why not Buffalo? We raise cows in Buffalo. It's 50 acres. Bison are kind of really hard to raise. You know, you build fences for cattle. You can just use a single electric fence or a barbed wire fence, and they tend to just rub up against them to scratch themselves. But outside of that, they leave them alone. You build fences for bison, they just go right through the damn fences. So they're real hard to raise. If you ever look at the bison ranches up in Wyoming or other areas, they build these giant stone walls to contain them. Bison are not really the easiest of animals to deal with. Now, yaks, on the other hand, are kind of like cattle, but actually in Mongolia, they have gambling games where so yaks are co-located with bulls. So the bulls will try to show their dominance over the male yaks. And so the herd sires will go at each other and lock horns. And so the bulls actually have more strength than the yaks, but the yaks have more endurance. And so the Mongols will actually bet on who's going to win. So if it's a long game, the yak almost always wins. If it's a short one, the bull will overpower the yak. So I've lost quite a bit of money in Mongolia gambling on yak bull conflict. It's a great sport, though. The football team is based in Uganda. Caitlin Long is coming to the IOHK Summit. If you guys come to the IOHK Summit, you'll have a chance to see her presentation. We'd love to work with her on the future of regulation, and we'll definitely have a conversation with her. Yeah, Aussie Floyd also does a great job. The Pink Floyd Experience, I think, is the Australian band, and then Brit Floyd is the other cover band for Pink Floyd. We asked both of them to play at the IOHK Summit, and both of them are busy, damn it. Their prices are quite reasonable. They were going to be the opening act for Steve Miller, so we decided to go with the legendary CCR instead, and they agreed. And I'll actually introduce them and spend some time with the CCR guys and also with Steve Miller. I like Brit Floyd more than the Australian Pink Floyd Experience. Cardano is what Ethereum would have been had I stayed at Ethereum. All right. Let's get this wrapped up. Guys, give me some interesting questions. You could raise Bigfoot. Hey, there's a movie I'm going to watch. It's The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then Killed Bigfoot. It's got that cowboy guy that was in The Big Lebowski. It looks amazing. It's probably a terrible movie, but I like movies like that. Have you noticed how lovely the spokeswoman for Nexo is? That's Teodora. Yes, everyone's noticed that. I think that's why they hired her, for her brilliance and ability to navigate the markets, and also friendly demeanor. Hi, Charles. What does the butterfly mean? The butterfly, there's two butterflies. There's the IOHK butterfly, and then there's the Atala butterfly. The Atala butterfly, come to the IOHK summit. You'll learn all about it. We'll announce something related to that. And the IOHK butterfly means cascading disruption, this concept of the butterfly effect. Subtle changes can have dramatic impacts on society as a whole. And we will have shorter addresses when Shelley comes out. They'll be about half the size, and then human-readable addresses will come. We've been talking to a lot of people about either a partnership to bring that in, like with the FIO protocol, or doing it ourselves. When are you planning on kids? Never. Never going to have children. Do you speak Italian? No. No parlo l'italiano. Why is Vitalik not on Rogan? What would he do on Joe Rogan? That would be like taking the Elon Musk interview and dialing it up to 11. Come on, guys. There are certain people that just are not built for that format. I would argue that Vitalik is not well constructed for that format. Are you active on LinkedIn? No, I don't even update my page. I actually on purpose have an incomplete profile. It bothers the hell out of all the LinkedIn trolls. Are you a cannabis fan? No. Tezos is using formal methods. Do you see them as a big competitor? Not really. I mean, there's a lot of complementarity with some of the things they're doing versus what we're doing. I've noticed that the Tezos community tends to attract certain subsets of people who are just really fucking mean. I mean, guys, own your fundraiser. I've certainly owned mine. Own yours. Own the sins. Own the past. And yeah, own that people can criticize you. I've never criticized their engineers. I've never criticized the efforts. I've just criticized that they raised $250 million and handed it to Johan Givers, and then complained when Johan wanted to use it for his own interests. What the hell did you expect? Put this guy in power. Own it. They never did. And then I'm the bad guy. And so they go to our Reddit over and over again, and they're really butthurt that we're worth 3 times as much money as them. And they feel like they're ahead of us for some reason. Well, we're ahead of you because we did research. It's not a cult of personality around a single engineer and a team of people that support him. We've written 40 papers. We've invented new things like secure proof of stake and new sidechains protocol and all these other things. And the market has a perception that these things will become reality at some point. When they do, they're a massive technological leap forward over our competition. If you want that, use some of your $250 million to also buy scientists and write great innovative papers. Or else you can just complain that you're not getting enough attention. Yeah. There are some things I do like. Like Mickelson is actually an entirely reasonable language. We did diligence on it. I think that they've done some good work there. Okay. Do you like electronic music? Well, everybody likes electronic music. Ironically, I think that if Trent Reznor just focused on that instead of some of the things he's done with Nine Inch Nails, he'd probably be the best EDM guy of all time. You could kind of see a little bit of it when he made the album with what was his name, Atticus Ross or something, with the social network. Those techno themes that they had, they were so well done. And I was like, wow, this guy, man, I really wish he did that. And he took that time off to do How to Destroy Angels with his wife or girlfriend or whatever that relationship was. That was one of the low points. Any solar on the ranch? I am exploring geothermal HVAC. I'm really excited about this. So when people think geothermal, they think about energy generation, but you can use geothermal to actually heat and cool homes and provide hot water. So basically, if you dig about 2-3 meters down, you get below frost line, and then you have a relatively constant temperature, regardless of the surface temperature. And that temperature differential, you can leverage that with a loop system and a coolant to basically either extract heat from underground or to store heat. And you can create a loop field that's either horizontal or vertical. So if you're limited on space, you go about 50 to 200 meters underground with the loop system. If you can dig trenches, then you dig them about the same distance, but just horizontally. So I have a ranch, so we can do horizontal loops here. But basically, once you put all these systems in place, you just create a pump system. And by changing pressure, it can either increase temperature or lower temperature, and it extracts energy or stores energy underground. But geothermal HVAC is great. It's about 5 times more efficient than a conventional furnace that burns natural gas, and about the same efficiency than a conventional air conditioning system. And it's basically constant efficiency regardless of ambient temperature, whereas an air conditioner is the least efficient at hottest temperatures. And so as a consequence, you need more energy at hotter temperatures. So we're going to explore it on the ranch, couple it with a solar system to power the pumps, and we'll see if that works. If it does, I'm going to convert all the structures in the ranch to have geothermal HVAC, and then we're also going to do radiant heating on the driveway all the way through. So I never have to shovel snow, because Colorado does dump snow. Another thing I'm going to explore is a glow-in-the-dark driveway. I got this idea from Amsterdam. If you go around some of the suburbs in the Netherlands, outside of Amsterdam, Ries, and other places, they actually put glow-in-the-dark materials into the concrete itself for bike paths. So you can do this with any concrete structure. And so I'm going to try to do a bunch of glow-in-the-dark artwork all the way throughout my driveway, because I'm going to rip up the whole driveway to put radiant pipes underneath it that are powered by the geothermal system. So I already have to tear out the concrete anyway, so it'd be fun to put something there. The other thing is I'm probably going to put it on black concrete. So if you Google Netherlands glow-in-the-dark bike path, you can see images of what these things look like, and they're very pretty. So I'm going to take that inspiration and try to do it here, and try to do it here with geothermal. Now, because there is a temperature gradient between below frost line and ambient temperature above, you potentially could embed Stirling engines into that type of a system, and potentially maybe generate some sort of background electricity, if anything, perhaps to regenerate a battery or maybe even power a home. It probably would not be as cost effective as solar or wind. It may be an order of magnitude actually less effective. You'd have to do some calculations on those gradients, but it would be 24/7 continuous electricity generation, which it could potentially be baseload power. So I did read one paper from the 80s on this, and there's a guy who had a grant out in Colorado who studied using low delta Stirling engines with a geothermal HVAC system for energy generation. So that's one thing, if I ever had some spare time, I'd look into it and spend some time with it. It's a pretty cool concept that you can earth power your home. But at the very least, geothermal HVAC is really cool. It's a bit more expensive than a conventional system, but they last basically forever. They're super low maintenance. They're quiet. They don't burn any fossil fuels, and they're easy to power with solar. And you also get free hot water out of it. Speaking of glow-in-the-dark cyanobacteria, these fluorescent genes are quite interesting. My first time I ever encountered them were when people were cross-linking genes with the Arabidopsis salina, which is a weed that is commonly used for genetic studies. The whole genome has been sequenced, and every student of genetics has some experience with this plant. So what they would do is connect whatever gene they were interested in with the jellyfish gene, and if the plant glows in the dark, then they know that the jellyfish gene has been, the gene they're interested in has been basically taken up by the plant. So you just look at it, you say, oh, okay, great, I don't have to consumer plants like trees and other such things, and you could actually sell them. People have been doing this with glowfish, and you can actually see bizarre Frankenstein-style experiments where they did this with rabbits and dogs that glow in the dark. And it would be pretty cool to do it with plants, though, because then I could actually have a 24/7 garden. So you have a day garden and then you have a night garden. The day garden looks like a normal garden, and that night glows in the dark in different colors. And then it would attract all kinds of bizarre insects, and then it would attract a lot of nocturnal creatures to eat the insects. So you'd actually have two complete biomes for one garden. Never sleeps. Wind flying car. We will never have that. We're going to have like drones that pick us up and drag us through the goddamn air, before we have flying cars. We've been trying to do that forever, man. But, if you live in Alaska or in a remote area, you can use a, what are those called? Paragliding, where you actually have the fan on your back and the parachute, and you just take off with it, fly through the sky. Some people in Alaska use that to get to work. All right, let's come on, guys. Will you integrate with Interledger ever? There's no reason not to, because then the user is deciding whether they want to do that or not. We are certainly going to integrate with Lightning. Rob Cohen is the guy who's in charge of that project, and he's going to do a great presentation at the IOHK Summit about it. Mycology, just finished MRS in plant nutrition, worked with bioluminescent fungi. Wish you well. Mycology is an understudied field. I'd encourage anyone listening to look at the work of Paul Stamets. He's a great entry point into how magical mushrooms can be. I've recently started drinking mushroom coffee. It's actually quite good and quite nutritious. And there's all kinds of really cool different mushrooms you can take that have been shown to have great health effects, in particular lion's mane. And I've been trying that. Cordyceps are another one. If you ever watch the game The Last of Us, that's actually a scientifically valid zombie apocalypse. What do you think of the Voynich manuscript? Really pretty book. I've actually seen it in person over at Yale. Yeah, mushrooms do actually have the ability to communicate with each other. Mycelia actually links trees together, and they can send chemical signals to each other. So if you guys are ever up for a cool Google search, go ahead and look at Wood Wide Network. Wood, like a tree, WOOD, wide network. It's basically like an internet for trees using Mycelia. If you're interested in the Voynich manuscript, by the way, look at the Codex Gygax. It's this giant Bible written by a monk, and they think the devil inspired him. All right, let's see if we have anything else. Good to see you. Arigato gozaimashita. Edos Barbada. Check us tea. Is Haskell your favorite language, or there's something you find as or more interesting? I really think Haskell is probably one of the best industrial functional programming languages on market. It's probably a good question to end the AMA with. Let's talk about programming languages for a bit. If you're really keen to learn a bit about programming, really you need to take a step back and say, well, there's kind of two routes you can go into that makes sense to me. The first route is just this concept of computation in general. Like, where did this come from? A lot of this stuff came from mathematicians trying to figure out better ways of stating mathematical proofs as kind of algorithms and programs, and finding a way to actually mechanize mathematics. So you can just write stuff, and break it into logical statements called well-formed formulas, and then gradually show that somehow this formula is true or false, or that you don't have enough information to solve it. It's undecidable because you don't have a complete set of axioms. But in the process of studying these things, there was actually 3 different foundations that were discovered. Lambda calculus was one. Recursive functions was another. That was done by Gödel. Lambda calculus was done by Alonzo Church. And then finally, Alan Turing with the Turing machine. Now, if you study that stuff, then you really kind of understand what is programming all about at its core, like bedrock, the theoretical underpinning of, well, why does this all matter? And then the let's make math better and let's rebuild the foundations of math, that ended up becoming the provenance of the logicians and type theorists, and all kinds of cool things were developed along that thread throughout the 20th century. And the people who study that fall in love with functional programming, and they can do quite a bit with it. Then the other route, there's a great book called From NAND, N-A-N-D, to Tetris. It was written by Schocken and Noam Nassan. And this book basically starts with the NAND gate, which is the fundamental thing in electrical engineering, the fundamental thing. And then you work from the NAND gate all the way to writing your own game of Tetris. So you start with, like, how do the circuits work, to, how does the operating system work, and how do the programming languages work? And we're going to write everything along the way, our own compilers and our own interpreters and our own OS, and basically our own synthetic hardware. And at some point you have enough information that you can write your own Tetris game with it. That gives you a very mechanistic, detailed understanding of how these boxes work, these computation devices work, the stored computer architecture, all these things, so that you can actually have an intelligent conversation about how the code runs, the environment that the code runs in. So if you have those 2 entry points, then you know enough that you basically learn anything. And then it's just a matter of learning foundations of computer science. So the structure, interpretation, computer programming, and the art of computer programming are 2 foundational textbooks. You'll encounter languages like Scheme and Lisp, and they're great entry points. Honestly, I'd say the most productive language a young computer scientist can learn, there are 2. One is Python, the other is Scala. Python, because it is basically like the pseudocode and the I want to do it quickly, I want to script it quickly, and it just has so many damn useful libraries for things. There's Sage for all this stuff. There's Anaconda. There's great data science tools for it, and it's just a little bit of everything. And you can build real stuff in Python, and Google loves it, and they put a lot of money into it, and other people love it. And Scala, because it's probably the most balanced and useful of all programming languages. You get the whole Java world, you get the whole object-oriented world, but then you get the whole functional world. And it does both of them well enough that you can build some of the most elegant and really well-tested, well-thought-out applications, but you don't give up too much in that process. So if you have to learn anything, Scala, I'd say, is the language to learn. There's a great series of Coursera classes from TypeSafe. There's a good introductory computer science textbook on Scala with a bunch of YouTube lectures for it. And if you learn that, that's a well that'll just keep on giving. Now, if you want to use more advanced functional programming techniques and be more pure, then you have languages like OCaml, F#, Haskell, and you can even go cray-cray. You can go like to super Haskell, and that's Agda. You can look at languages like Coq and Lean. And as you go into these more esoteric applications, generally you're only doing this because you're either a mathematician who wants to prove something and know it's right, and you like computational logic, or you are an aerospace engineer or medical software dude, or doing what we do at IWHK, where the failure of the software results in either loss of human life, like in the case of the MCAS error with the Boeing 737, or the loss of property, like when a space probe explodes or something like that. So if you don't need to do that, then don't do it. It's too hard. There are books to learn these things, like Software Foundations from Benjamin Pierce is one. We wrote one. Phil Wadler wrote it, which took software foundations and it wrote it with Agda. But if you don't have to go down that road, that's a deep tunnel, and it doesn't give much back in terms of practical engineering. I'd say mastering Scala would be an incredibly strong entry point, and it gives you the dynamicism to kind of go in many different directions. Scala is a great prototyping language. It's a great language to build general purpose applications in. It's a great data science language. It's a great microservice architecture language. Netflix uses it. Wonderful libraries, wonderful support. It's been around for, I think, 15 years or something like that, and there's a lot of magic to it. If you fall in love with Lisp, Clojure is a very solid, wonderful ecosystem, easy to work with. ClojureScript is great, and that's fun. If you fall in love with object-oriented programming, then just use Better C, which is Rust. That's a great language. Or Go is an entirely reasonable language as well. Google did a good job in that ecosystem. I'm sad that Dart didn't get more love. I think Dart's a great language too, but TypeScript kind of beat that war. Even Google threw in the towel there. I think Angular is using TypeScript as its scripting framework. Anyway, we can talk about languages forever, my friends, but we're unfortunately out of time. Thank you guys all for listening, and I certainly had a lot of fun. And it's always humbling, when I have a chance to share some of my life with you. And I'll let you know how the yaks, alpacas, and camels are doing once they've all been integrated. Cheers.